Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another beautiful Wednesday on the HPR Chronicles Podcast with Shakur and Smith. My agent told me to say podcast.
Oh.
Don't forget that.
Okay.
Because podcasts are blowing up so big now, man. It's like, so even on the other one, I say podcast. Anyway, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, it's a podcast about history, politics, and race from a perspective with swag.
With swag, I like that.
Not corny or boring. We just try to break a couple of things down for you guys, simple and plain. I'm a film director from Trinidad and Tobago, and I've traveled a lot, and I always had a love for history and politics. And Chris is a veteran of the Army Reserves, and he works for the VA, and he has a passion for history and politics. And together we came up with the HPR Chronicles Podcast with Shakur and Smith. And we always say it's about truth. It's not pro any race, just pro truth. And if the truth offends you, we're sorry, not sorry. That's what we say. And that's a big not sorry for you people that are not about truth. So, yeah, we're not racist at all.
No.
We're just about truth. So today we have a good one. So sometimes, guys, we have a conversation. Sometimes we, talk about stuff we've seen and stuff like that, or something we've researched. And today's subject is something that struck a chord with me. I'm 46, so, probably when I was 20 or 21, Crispy.
Okay. What?
Something like that, really young age. This struck a chord with me when I started studying slavery and the history of slavery and how they made us into slaves. Mm-hmm. And I realized that we were robbed of our history, our culture, our religion, our names, the whole nine.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the first things that dawned on me was, well, if we were robbed of our names, why don't we go back to our names? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's so important. What I'm talking about today is extremely important. So I'm going to start off by reading an excerpt from this guy that I found online, and his name is Zeron Burnett III. And the title of it is, "Hey, Black America, let's all ditch our slave names."
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to read that first, and then me and Smith here will have an educated conversation about our names and why I don't have my slave name anymore and why he still does and what I did to change mine, and we'll all get into it. So that sounds good, Chris?
It's gonna get heated.
That's good. Well, that's good.
It'll be interesting because you are gonna give me your views, and I do remember you mentioning it. So I had.
I mentioned it to you. I told you because I wanted you to have some stuff to say.
I gotta say I forgot until you just mentioned it, but
it's all good.
I had to do my own research of stuff. So
it's all good. So let me read this real quick, and even before I read this though, Chris, just to put it plain, we're being called out of our names, and we shouldn't be. We shouldn't have the names of our slave masters still. You know what I mean? Sione, our camera guy. He has a name of his original culture. You know what I mean? It's anyway. So let me read Zeron's excerpt that he did, and it starts off. I got this idea from the filmmaker Ava DuVernay, who I love. Not directly. She didn't tell me this. In fact, she's never said anything like this as far as I know. Yet, in that funny way the world works, I got the idea from her. Well, Ava and Game of Thrones. In the hours just before the premiere of the 7th season, she tweeted out what her GOT name and house and sigil and house motto would be if she were on the show. I don't watch the show, so I don't know what SIGIL means or whatever.
It's a banner type.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she asked her followers to share what their names and houses would be. Normally, I don't play around much on Twitter, but I love Game of Thrones and Ava, so I did. When I typed the first words of the tweet, I couldn't get past "I am Zeron of House Burnett." I paused. A century and a half after the end of slavery, and I'm still identifying with the name of the slave owner who once owned my family. That's my house, their house. That sucks. That's a bone-deep pain, one hidden and held in the letters of my last name. And after I posted my response tweet to Ava, that pain of slavery got me thinking of one question. What if Black Americans ditched our slave names? What if we cut that psychic chain that binds us to slavery in name and deed? Which is, the very important aspect that I want to point out in today's podcast. What he just said, like cutting that psychic chains that binds us to slavery in name and deed, We could do it. I was thinking we could do it in the next Juneteenth. It's the day Black America marks the end of slavery. It's an exceedingly special day for us. So what if we commemorate it next year by all Black Americans going down to their county courthouses and applying for a name change? Can you imagine that? It would be one of the greatest protests in the history of America. And y'all know we could have some fun coming up with new last names. And the funny thing about it is, and let me just stop real quick, I believe it should be the first and last name. And it's funny, when I think I told you this story, when I met the, you know how he says it would be the greatest protest in the history of America, and it would be. Mm-hmm. And when I met the Queen of Ghana, West Africa, she was in town for some important events, and I happened to know a Baptist minister that knew her, and it was a really big event. All these entertainers was there, and she was there. And because I knew this minister, he's really prominent in entertainment as well. He's friends with Will Smith and that family. And Anyway, I've known him for decades, and I'm in entertainment too, and we all were there. And when I told her my name, I'll never forget this. She asked me where I got the name from. And I said, when I studied slavery, I decided to change my name. And she was shocked and taken aback. And she said, you are way ahead of your time. She asked me how old I was. And at the time, I was in my 20s, mid-20s when I first moved to L.A. And she said, every Black person in the world that's being called out of the name will eventually change it. And you're way ahead of the game. Cool. And I commend you, and that's unbelievable. I'll never forget that. And she was like, if you ever come to West Africa, come and visit, blah, blah. It was crazy. Wow. And, and for me, I just did it, just learn about slavery. You know what I'm saying? And I knew I didn't want this a part of my identity and who I was. So to hear it from someone who was from where those slave ships even came from and understood what I did and knew that it was something that had to happen in the future, it really tripped me out at the time, Anyway, so let me finish reading. So when he says it's the greatest protest, and it'll be the greatest protest in the history of America, that's what she was explaining to me. But she was saying around the world, So anyway, but most importantly, it would sever that everlasting connection to our slave past. It would be a massive act of freedom for Black America. It would force the nation to confront the legacy of slavery. Most white people in America have never considered what it means to walk around with the name of the family that once owned your family. Just imagine if all Black America changed their names on the same day. If, let me go down here. If you're Black, you may be reading this and thinking, baby bruh, why the hell would I want to do that? Then I'd have to go and change my name on all my credit cards, my driver's license, all of my official paperwork, subscriptions, prescriptions, medical records, legal documents, all sorts of shit. And just for our audience, I had to do it, and it was so simple. It's not a big deal at all. Yes, you would, but think about this. Married women do that every day. Nearly every time a woman gets married in America, she changes her name. If all of the married women in America can change their names, it's not impossible for all of Black America to change their names. Thinking back on its genesis, this idea really has two parents. Both of them are tweets. Other than Ava's Game of Thrones tweet, there was another tweet, one that was about a photo of a Native American woman in all of human history. Few peoples have created such beautiful, strangely poetic names as certain tribes of Native Americans. That's not to fetishize them, it's just aesthetically true. Well, at least to me it is. the tweet I'm referencing focused on a woman named Baicha Lapesh. She was a Crow. Her husband's name translated as rides a white-hipped horse. Her name translates as kills pretty ones. How fucking dope is that? Imagine being able to legit roll into a party and be like, thanks for having us. Have you met my wife? Kill pretty ones? So badass. That silly little daydream, fun as it was, made me hate my slave name all the more. And more precisely, it made me question why I keep it. Malcolm X doing the name slave master. So basically this is a transcript from an interview Malcolm X did years ago. Okay. You know, talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So Malcolm X, during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in history, you will find that his grandfather or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. If his name was Bunch, his grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch. Interviewer: I get your point. Would you mind telling me what your father's name was? Malcolm X responds: my father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got his from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery. Think about that. No, for real. Think about that. If you aren't black, you may have never considered what it means to walk around carrying the mark of your family slave master. If you think about it too much and too deeply, it'll fuck you up. Mm-hmm. That's probably why many, if not most, black Americans never think about it. Not really. It's just too dark and too visceral and too real to consciously remember that every day when you put your name on something, you're extending the reach of your former slave master. Every time a black athlete is celebrated, unless it's someone extremely woke like Muhammad Ali or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or even Metta World Peace, who consciously change their names to suit themselves, that world-famous athlete makes their family's former slave master more famous. Same for every black CEO, every actress or actor, every black politician, and every black activist. When their name shows up in the press, they honor and extend their family's former slave master's memory. That's fucked up, which is why Muhammad Ali said this of his birth name: Cassius Clay is a slave name. I didn't choose it and I don't want it. I am Muhammad Ali, a free name. It means beloved God, and I insist people use it when people speak to me. You know where you also find this power of self-applied names? Hip-hop. Think about it. Jay-Z just changed his name back to Jay-Z. This may seem like nothing new, but it's important because it's about the fact that he made Jay-Z famous. Mm-hmm. It's his name, and he could do with it whatever he wants. And sure, we all know his real name is Sean Carter, but it's also not. His real name is Jay-Z. That's who the world honors. And it's true for Bey too. She may be Beyonce Knowles, but we all know and think of her as Beyonce, a singular phenomenon, which is what all black Americans should feel like, a singular phenomenon. A person unto themselves, free from the painful and horrific history of slavery, free people. So with all that in mind, black America, what will your name be? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I found this excerpt, and I thought it was perfect for my show today. Yeah. No. Once I read it, I was like, "It's all right," because I had looked up stuff before, mm-hmm. and there's like a whole complete reading on it somewhere else, but it's super long. Okay. Because I mean, it's so when I saw this, I said, "This is perfect," because I just wanted to have a conversation about it anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. Recently, we had some people in town. A friend of mine who we were developing a TV show with, he's from Africa. Really cool guy. His name is Anthony. He flies airplanes. Probably one of the many few black pilots that does acrobats and stuff like that with airplanes. Okay. But he's from Africa, and he still has his African name. Mm-hmm. And Well, he had some colleagues in town, some aviation colleagues in town from Curacao.
Anthony is his.
No, he uses Anthony, but he only uses that in America. But it's Anthony with his African last name, and when he's at home with family, he uses his first and African last name.
Okay.
He only used Anthony in America because it was easy for people.
Okay.
You know, yeah. So he had some, they had a big aviation convention in Curacao, and in Vegas. And a matter of fact, Chris and I will be going to the automotive version of that next week. Yeah. And maybe, we could do a show about the history of the automobile or whatever, maybe next week or the week after or whatever.
Sounds good.
Anyway, so they came back in town, and me for one, I had never met anyone from Curacao before.
Yeah, me neither.
So when you were still at work, we got into a conversation over at Miramonte, and I didn't know that Curacao was one of the islands that the slaves came to that still kept their African language. Oh, wow. So they were speaking in this African language that only the people of Curacao could actually speak. You know what I mean? So they were colonized by the Dutch. Okay. So they speak French, English, and this African language. And it was really interesting. So we hung out with them for the rest of the day, took them to Old Town, and you ended up joining us and stuff like that. Okay. So there was a moment when we were at Bailey's, and I heard them talking in their language. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And it was interesting to me.
I heard it too. 100%.
Yeah, and it was me, Anthony, and them. Yeah. I don't know where you were, but it was just us
heard
three.
them speaking.
No, but this was another time when it was just us. Okay. When it was just us four. You weren't standing there, I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm not saying you didn't hear them. I'm sure you did. They kept speaking in it off and on, Yeah. So anyway, when I heard them speaking it, and remembering what they had told me at Miramonte, how they still had their language from Africa, because we started talking about colonization and this and that, it made me think about the names. So Anthony was standing. Go ahead.
And I'm not trying to throw it off, but I'm trying to understand. Are you thinking that African countries don't have their own language besides what the colonies had?
What do you say it again? Answer the question again.
That Curacao, they speak their native African language, right?
Yeah.
Like Ethiopia, stuff like that, or Eritrea, they speak their own.
Oh yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
but my whole point is in Trinidad we don't speak the African language that came with slavery. They kept it for some reason. Is my point. We all came from Africa. So all the slaves that came to Africa, all the slaves that went to Brazil, all the slaves that went to Jamaica, Bahamas, none of them speak the African language still, but Curacao does.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. We all just speak English with this accent. But they speak English and that African language that they came with, which is interesting.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking the reason why it probably didn't happen is because you had tribes from different things, and they didn't allow it. I'm sure, like the fact. Okay, you've watched Roots before, right? And we all, if you've seen it in the beginning or after Kunta Kinte, he's being whipped, and they keep asking his name and tell him to say Toby. And he keeps trying to fight and saying Kunta Kinte. What I'm just trying to say is they broke people down so that they couldn't speak their language. Right. And eventually you can't, by separating, you're not going to be able to keep that language. You're going to have to learn something else.
That's my whole point. It's interesting that they were able to keep it, though, in that little island. Were they enslaved? You're making my point. Their ancestors were. So it came down through the ancestors. Just like our ancestors were. At? Just like our ancestors were enslaved.
Where's Curacao at?
It's right above Venezuela.
Oh, for some reason I didn't. That's why I didn't even look up where it was at.
Oh yeah, it's an
now
island
I get what you. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm like, what's
that's why I didn't understand.
Great. Yeah.
Now I get it. Yeah, that is impressive.
Yeah, for some reason, which they were telling me at Miramonte, for some reason. They were able to keep their language.
Got it.
Which is deep. Like,
that's why I said I wasn't. Okay.
It's all good. That's why it's a podcast.
Sure. And we I got it.
Which was really deep to me. So again, when I heard them speaking in their native language again from Africa before slavery and stuff, it made me think about their names. So I said, I knew it was Charity and David, but I said, so are you guys aware of your native names? And they were like, no. And me, David, and Charity and Anthony got into a deep conversation about it, and it was great because here you had an African brother who lives in America who still had his name. Mm-hmm. You have an African brother who lives in America who changed his name. Mm-hmm. Then you had some African people who still spoke that native African language, but still had their slave masters' names.
Gotcha.
So it made for an interesting conversation. Yeah. So David goes, well, man, I'm kind of over it. I don't think it bothers me or whatever. So I said, David, I'm not saying it bothers you. So Sherry got it. She was like, man, I totally get it. I've never even thought of this. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And David goes, I get it, but what does it matter now? I'm over it. And I told him, I said, David, you're not over it. It's not about being over anything. Mm-hmm. It's more about you walking around with this identity, what you identified with and by, mm-hmm. being something not who you are. It's not yours, and it came from something negative, from someone that owns you and just named your family for ownership, and you still carry that name and that legacy with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Anthony, who not privy to that, was like, whoa. He was like, man, because he has his name. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Gotcha. So he totally got it. And he was like, man, you just like poured water in their grass. They're going to go back home greener. Because you brewed it like they never even thought about something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was just crazy. And Anthony obviously speaks his native language too. I think he's from Nigeria. I forget what African country, but he still has his name and has his language. You know what I mean? So yeah, man, and then when I told them, they were like, yeah, that was, I never even thought of it. Like, I forgot what I explained to David, but whatever I told him that night at Bailey's, it made him go, man, yeah, I never thought about it like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is something of meaning. And I'm telling them, like, especially for you two, you guys still have the native language. Yeah. Just imagine if you had the actual name. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I was looking, and I you can jump in whatever you want, Crispy, but I was looking at Byron Allen today on the Breakfast Club, which was an amazing interview. Mm-hmm. And he said something very important that I didn't think about before that you and I covered. Yeah. He said, what a lot of people don't realize is, when slavery was abolished and Jim Crow came into effect, mm-hmm. it made it even worse. And it made it even worse because we went from being property to a liability. When we were property, they had a lot of control, and we were something that they needed for work and the produce, things, this, that, and the other. And when they freed us, they didn't know what to do with us, and we became a liability, which is how Jim Crow happened and all the lynchings happened. Because they had to do that as a way, because they know what to do. All these people are going to rebel. We don't want them to have any power. Yeah. We don't want them to have any rights. Yeah. So they enacted Jim Crow. And I'd never heard that perspective before. I was like, man, that's crazy. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it does.
You know what I'm saying? Byron Allen was like, yeah, if slavery hadn't ended, and he wasn't saying it shouldn't have ended, but he was saying we were safer when we were in slavery.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with it 100%. I would still say that obviously if you escaped or if you couldn't, at least it appeared from movies that if you attempted to escape or if you couldn't pull your weight in cotton, then you were disposable enough to be killed. You know what I mean, or beaten severely. So not for the most part, I agree that they wanted their property, their help, their servants, to their slaves to be as 100% as possible. But
if there was a way they could have shipped us back to Africa, that's what they would have done.
Well, yeah, I mean, because we already saw it.
We became a big liability that they didn't know what to do with. Once slavery actually ended,
which is why, obviously why. The Southerners didn't want, because I'm sure they saw it, but the Northerners didn't, they weren't thinking. I mean, I don't think they all wanted to, overall though, you're probably more right than not that they wanted to get them out of here or get us out of here. But because it would have been such a crazy feat to do, some people were trying to integrate, and bring every civil rights and stuff like that. So, but okay, so when you were talking about the name thing, I've thought about that, but I thought on a different way. I mean, I remember watching again Roots and how hearing that a lot of times the slaves were named after the slave owner. So ideally, my last name is Smith, so it's a very good chance that any slave owners that were in there was Smith. Also, though, growing up, I took it on as more like my ancestry, whoever who got away, worked as a blacksmith, and decided to just cut it short and take the Smith part of it.
Okay, that's the way you rationalized
always
it.
Had it with my head. Yeah. So then, growing up, though, my father just was always like, "We're the Smiths. I want you to carry that name and that lineage on." So for me, I mean, really, my father, wanted that. Right. So, and then with my first name being Christopher, I was actually named after my grandfather. My middle name's the same name as my father. Right. So I understanding exactly what you're saying, but I twisted it to at least fit my
right. I got you. Yeah.
So
and it's funny. I'm sure
and that's very possible that yes, an ancestry of mine was a blacksmith and decided to just take the last name Smith. Or worked as a blacksmith and had some other name and said, "I'm not going to take the Johnson that I did have, and instead I'm going to call my
Smith and just cut it off.
Do Smith." So I don't know.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to say is I'm glad you brought up your grandfather, and it's probably just out of just not knowing the importance of breaking that chain. My grandfather, on the other hand, when I changed my name, and me and my grandfather was the closest. I was born on February 14th. He was born on February 18th. We looked the most alike. It was weird. We were very similar, me and my grandfather. Yeah. And when I changed my name, he was actually happy. And because my mother thought he would be upset, I'm not carrying on the Bernard, the lineage and all that. Yeah. And when I talked to my grandfather and told him what I did, he was happy and he commended me. And it was then that he explained to me our slave passage even. Oh. So for me it was quite different. He was like, actually, I'm glad you broke this cycle and chain of this name. And now my daughter, who's looked at as a black woman in America, she has a name of Eastern descent. You know what I mean?
But so only difference for me is that and I'm sorry to cut it, is just to say that the grandfather that would have said that to me, he wasn't around.
I got you.
That's all I was just want to. So it's different. Yeah. So like with my father's side, it's like my grandmother my grandmother, and there's other people I kind of met, but not really. So so then that's why I say, and even with my grandmother, the older my aunts and uncles are a different last name, Hanks, and then my other aunt and uncle below my dad are O'Neill. So it's like we're the only Smith. Yeah. So in a way, that's what I'm just trying to say for why I did what I did mentally, because Smith is such a goddamn common name that I've thought about it, switching it just.
Yeah, I mean, what I did was.
Go ahead.
No, you could have the floor. It's a podcast. What I did when I started studying slavery, I just looked up, a lot of names, and I chose Imani because it's Swahili and it's spoken by many African tribes and nations. Mm-hmm. So I was like, this is perfect because I don't know what tribe I came from. Yeah. I might get lucky when I do my DNA test to find out I am from one of those tribes that I chose the name from. Got it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I chose Shakur. It means Imani means faith, and Shakur means thankful. Yeah.
And I want to interrupt and say what's impressive is we'll be out and he'll introduce and he'll say his first name, and a lot of people will be like, "I'm sorry, what?" Yeah. But then there'll be those few that really know, and they're like, do you know your name is?
I'm like, yeah, exactly.
So I got every single time. I'm like, damn, that's impressive, you know.
Yeah,
So
it's so funny.
but yeah.
So that's why I chose those names. I mean, Shakur is more on the Middle Eastern end, but it's still African too because we were there too. You know what I mean? That's how I
What
look
does
at
that
it.
mean again?
Thankful.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, and it's the same reason why people like Tupac and his family changed their name. I'll give you guys Tupac's name before his family changed it. But it's the same reason why his mom changed his name.
And I will also, and more about this stuff is that growing up, I had family that practiced as are Muslims, and 5%. So it's out of Chicago, and they're my aunt, so their mother changed her name when she became a Muslim, and so all the kids have, like my one cousin, shout out Abdul Muhammad, and then there's a cousin you met, Basima, they have
too. Yeah,
Africa. No, she didn't change. That's what her mother named her.
The last name too, or just the first name? Oh,
first and no, they changed everything. So
that's awesome.
It was.
That's what I'm saying. See, the people that do that though is great, man. I mean, the way you feel. I remember when I did it, I was so young, and I remember how I felt after. Like, it's almost like this thing that falls off of you that you didn't know actually existed. Oh. You know what I mean? It's weird, but. For those that didn't know, Tupac Shakur's original name was Lassane Parish Crooks. So when people say, because a lot of times I'll get, are you related or something? And I'm like, I always say I plead the fifth, but I actually want to say, listen, we all had slave names. Tupac's mom didn't want him to have a slave name, so she changed her name and his, and I did the same thing. Yeah. And I'm in entertainment too, so if you want to call us entertainment cousins who didn't want slave names, you could say that. But we all didn't have this Shakur name, but it's something that we picked because of its meaning.
Did I tell you about the time some woman asked me about that?
No.
So
she asked about me?
No. About so I was at, you mentioned Miramonte, having a glass. KK was there, and Georgie and someone else, I can't remember. And so then he had seen someone he recognized, and these two ladies sat down. One kind of came over, and she was like, "What's your name?" And I go, "Christopher." She's like, "No, what's your name?" And I was like, and I knew what she was talking about, but I was like, "It's Christopher." Yeah. And it was a white woman, so it's not like I was being confronted by, it was just interesting. Sorry, it was just interesting that a white woman would do that type of thing. So it's like.
What name did she want?
She wanted me to actually, and then she wanted to talk about the fact that Christopher is not my name. Got you. So again,
which is why Muhammad changed his name. Which is why Malcolm called himself X. Yeah. I mean, and I honestly think that this needs to be spoken about more. I think it's extremely important. And I think one day is something that we all have to end up doing, and it'll be an amazing day. And I love the idea of doing it on Juneteenth. And in today's technology, when I did it, DNA tests didn't even exist. So, and the great thing about now, if people do it, they can go and get a DNA test and find out what tribes actually came from. And they can pick a name from that tribe. To me, that's even better.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that people who use non-traditional names currently should now let go of that also? And
like for example?
I mean, is Mercedes considered a traditional name? Nowadays, yeah, sort of, but it's not a name that would have been used until after the car was put out there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just depends the origin of. To me, it just depends the origin of the name Mercedes. But that's a good question. I mean,
but some are not even that they just make
all
up.
Those are things that people would have to grapple with within themselves. Like if you if you want to use, Mercedes, Shakur, whatever you want to use of African descent before slavery. I mean, whatever you want to do, but just something that disconnects you from that slavery.
Okay.
Because we're still walking around with this thing on our backs, and believe it or not, if everybody did that, it'll change the game.
Okay.
People in America,
in a way, I do see
people in America. It'll be a shocker. It'll be the greatest day in American history, just like this thing says.
Yeah.
And all the way, who's like, oh my God, they took their names back. And every time you walk in somewhere, you'd have to be calling someone of their name of culture.
Yeah.
And it'd be
that's huge, because you're right.
Huge.
Because right now,
and
by
we
having
have
the
a
regular
certain sense of more unity as well.
Yeah, by having regular names, let's just go about saying it like that,
Yeah.
or names that don't have a meaning. Anyway, if you at least get rid of your slave name, whatever it may be, and take on something else, yes, the power of it would be huge, and it would automatically make people understand that this country is very diverse or whatever.
Yeah,
because
the Chinese still have their names.
Yep.
The Asians still have their names.
Latins.
Yep, Latins still have their names.
Still have their names.
Yeah,
at least a name that
the name that Spain came in. Yeah, but it would unite us as a people. It'll connect us to our heritage and our culture, and we will finally feel as if we have a home. We have somewhere that we can call home. Like how Mark says, well, I'm Italian. Mark can go back to Italy. You and I say that, we don't know where to go.
Yeah. No,
you know what I'm saying?
I remember
I can go back to Trinidad, but like my grandfather told me, we came from Africa to Tobago, from Tobago to Trinidad. When I changed my name, he told me the whole story. So what was that country before Tobago? You know what I'm trying to say?
No, I mean, I definitely, because what I was going to add is that when I was in high school, I remember one time having a discussion, and I kind of got up and was like, y'all talk about, when people say you need to go back, like as where we are now, I don't even know where to go back to.
Right.
And if you say that this is, white country or whatever, that's, it's just wrong. So, I mean, I feel like I've had that understanding at a pretty young age, and not necessarily that someone spoke to me about it. It was more just, I did watch. I mean, Roots did hit me in a way to go, damn.
Yeah.
So I get it. And that's why I understood why he resisted. And ideally, he would, that maybe when he did be, just that it was very interesting to see how they changed people.
Right.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, so anyway, I just wanted to shed light on the importance of this and talk about how I went through my name change and why I did it and stuff like that. And, just kind of talk about how my family felt about it. And just get people to thinking and talking about this more. To me, this should go right along with reparations.
And you're going to tie the two together.
Yeah, it should. I think that'll be awesome.
Actually, it would be interesting.
Which Byron Allen talked about today, too.
You'll get something, but you'll get more if you change your last name. Because then you are taking on, this is reparations because I was, I'm an ancestry of Africa, or, from the African slaves. So how is, how is Smith, do I keep that, So I would have something, but hopefully it would be something with a SM, I sort of want to keep.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway.
And it's funny. One more thing I want to say before we sign off from this show is I'm sure when they captured these people to keep track of who they were, they had to have their original names. Because they probably they probably back then tried to pronounce the original names to get them to do things before they changed all the names. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I mean, because how else would they identify them? They maybe by number. Or however you know what I'm trying to say? But I'm sure they had, because remember, they had deeds with the names on it. And so-and-so would be now called so-and-so. And remember all those those bills of sales and all that?
But I don't know that
I'd have to look it up. I don't know if they had names on it. So, but I know
because that would be interesting if it did have original. And somehow
we were robbed. Yeah, they always say we were robbed of our name, our culture, our God, and this, that, and the other. So
yeah.
Anyway, I hope this was a thought thought-provoking show for you guys. And yeah, go out there and get your name changed. It's a simple process. It's really easy. And like I said, today you can do your DNA and even try to pick a name from one of the tribes you're from and stuff like that. And yeah.
Just like you had said earlier, women do it all the time to change their name after getting married.
Yep.
And even though I wouldn't necessarily want to do it, it's not that hard of a process.
No, it's not hard at all.
I would, you know.
Yeah, the sheet they give you when you change it, you just take that everywhere, and they just, okay.
And as much as
it's a court binding document, so they have to give you the new stuff in your new name.
And as much as I wanted to contradict you more, and I mean, I really did think about this. So it's not like, it was interesting that you brought that up, and I like your statements towards it. But because I had already rationed it out in my head, it's not like David. I'm sure he never really. I don't think he thought about it. Yeah. But I did think about it. But I thought of it as a in a different way to say my people were blacksmiths. So that's So I just kind of went with that idea. Yeah. And then now that helped me just keep it as it's not as bad.
Yeah. Got it.
So anyway,
guys, so we're gonna do today in history for November 6th. Friendsgiving is coming up. We're not gonna call it Thanksgiving. You know what I'm saying? Because of what they did to the Indians, the natives that day.
There was some place I saw that changed Christopher Columbus Day to Indigenous people.
Yeah,
and I can't
that's what people are doing now. They're actually trying to get Christopher Columbus Day, like, get rid of it altogether, and I understand. You know what I mean? So Friendsgiving is coming up, and we're going to be off that week for sure, but we'll talk about that maybe next show. Just want to remind everybody, and we'll be off for Christmas and New Year's as well. But yeah, when those shows come up, we'll talk about that more. So anyway, today's November 6th. Today in history, let me give you 4 historical facts real quick. The inventor of basketball, James Naismith, was born. Talk about the Smith thing. In 1861, the guy invented basketball, November 6th in 1861. Another good one is Abraham Lincoln was elected to be the 16th president of the United States in 1860 this day. Another one is, because we talked about the guns and stuff with Civil War a few episodes ago, Jefferson Davis was elected as the president of the Confederacy in the U.S. in 1861. And then one more for you guys. This is an interesting one. Jacob Sheik was granted a patent for the electric shaver.
Sheik.
Sheik. Yeah, because that's the thing. Yeah, I knew that's what it was. I'm like, was it always Sheik? That's what I was grappling with in my mind. I'm like, was it Sheik or Sheik back then? But I remember Sheik anyway. Yeah. So what year was that? That was in 1923. He was granted the patent for the electric shaver.
Electric. Okay.
Anyway, because before then it was just
Straight.
Anyway, guys, that's our show. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for checking in. I forgot to say at the top of the show to subscribe on ISENT Group Digital, so you can always get all this good information on history, politics, and race. And wherever you get your podcasts, you can get us. Thanks for listening. It's the HPR Chronicles Podcast with Shakur and Smith.
That's me.
And we're signing off until
next week.
What are we talking about next week?
Politics, or the political parties.
The political parties. All right. Thanks for checking in with us, guys. See you guys next time. Peace out.
Peace.